Before we get into our discussion, it's important for us to state that the Higher Education Reform Experts South Africa is a European Union-funded project. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of our guests and our guests alone. They do not represent or reflect the official policy or position of HERESA or the member institutions and organizations by whom our guests are employed. Unless otherwise stated, HERESA does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, view, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in the HERESA podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking to two of our HERESA members whose experience, skills, and knowledge in work-integrated learning, or WIL, will illustrate why this conceptual framework is vital to the overall employability and workplace readiness of students in higher education institutions. Our first guest is Professor Rolien Brink, who is an associate professor and researcher in the Department of Applied Information Management at the University of Johannesburg. She holds a PhD from UJ with a focus on information management for the work-integrated learning process. In addition, she obtained a Master's of Education in Computer-Based Education, again from UJ, and she has a Bachelor of Technology in Human Resources Management from what was previously known as Technikon South Africa. Our second guest is Dr. Henry Jacobs, who is the Director of Work-Integrated Learning and Industry Liaison at the Central University of Technology in the Free State. Dr. Jacobs is a member of University South Africa World of Work Strategy Group and the chairperson of their Learning and Practice Community of Practice and Thens's WIL Task Team. He's been involved in work-integrated learning for the last 25 years and obtained his master's degree in higher education studies and a doctorate of technology in business administration with the focus on WIL strategy to enhance the employability of students. More recently, he served as a project manager for the development of guidelines for universities in South Africa regarding WIL in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, an endeavor which was endorsed by the Minister for Higher Education, Science and Technology for the implementation in the higher education system. Professor Brink, Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the HERESA podcast.
Thank you, Kanya, for the opportunity.
So I like to start these conversations with what might strike you both as a rather simple question, and that is, in your view, what is work-integrated learning? We'll start with you first, Professor Brink.
A very interesting question, Kanya. I think that the work-integrated learning community within South Africa, even at USAF last year, we have a debate around that. But from the University of Johannesburg perspective is, we refer to it as work-integrated education as the umbrella term that has different modalities such as work-integrated learning, simulations, project-based learning, problem-based learning. So work-integrated learning, to come back to your question, is the integration of theory into practice. So that's my definition of WIL.
Dr. Jacobs, do you have anything to add?
I think the professor has covered it very well, Kanya. The only thing that I can maybe add is that we must just bear in mind that work-integrated learning is a curriculum matter. In other words, it's just like any other normal theoretical subject that you must take. And there are three parties involved always, the university, the student, and the employer. And it various forms, like Professor Brink has mentioned, workplace-based learning, which is the most common one, where we place students with employers in industry. And then things like project-based learning, problem-based learning, simulations, etc.
I'm thinking of some of our listeners who aren't involved or connected to the world of higher education, who may ask themselves, well, isn't work-integrated learning what higher education institutions are supposed to be doing? Aren't they supposed to be preparing students for the expectations of the workplace? I think both of you can take a crack at this question, but why the need for this conceptual framework when most people assume that higher education inherently teaches students how to be employable?
I think, Kanya, sorry, Dr. Henry, can I go first?
Please go.
I'm so passionate about this topic. Mind my eagerness to answer. If I can just say from yes, the higher education is supposed to prepare the students for the workplace, but what we as the University of Johannesburg was teach from the pandemic of COVID-19 is that we need to start working or thinking outside of the box. Work integrated learning is where we place the students for 6 months to get the experience. And with the pandemic, it is very difficult to place those students. And it's also it's a burden on the university to find placement for the students, because currently we have a high unemployment rate. And if I just look at the hospitality industry, I mean, some of the people I have a conversation with tell me straight, if I need to make a decision between my employer and a student that I need to place for a work integrated learning, then I rather keep the permanent person that I have instead of training the student. That's why the university start thinking outside of the box and try implementing other modalities of work integrated learning. USAF is referring to it as WIL, and under WIL there's different modalities. And that's why our university specifically is very into the other modalities of simulations. And it's not just simple simulations, but it is virtual reality simulations where we physically send the students with virtual reality goggles under mining situations where they will shoot for under the mine and stuff like that. And where we will have virtual reality teaching, where we train our teachers virtually with avatars and things like that. So I think, yes, that it is, but it is very important that the universities in South Africa and that higher education in South Africa need to think differently about preparing the student for the world of work.
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned work experience. And I'm glad you mentioned our high unemployment rate, because we're constantly faced with these scary statistics around youth unemployment. And I think I often hear employers complain that, higher education institutions aren't teaching graduates how to apply skills and knowledge in the workplace. Does the existence of WIL mean that higher education institutions are battling to make their graduates employable or job ready?
Kanya, I think I'll go for this one. Very pertinent and relevant question regarding unemployment and the views expressed by employers that students aren't really work ready. If we go or start from the premise that knowledge is power, but if you've attained knowledge, what do you do with it? And that is what we do at CUT, and then also in general with work integrated learning. Why do we do this? Say, for example, we had to present a qualification in swimming, a diploma in swimming. We can give a person all the theory and the person has all the theory, but that is no guarantee that the person can actually swim. So the person has to go to the swimming pool, and that is where the true test lies. And that's really the rationale for work integrated learning. We don't only give the theory, but we also give the opportunity for students to go to the swimming pool, so to speak, to go to employers, to go and apply that knowledge so that they can become more work ready. The study that I did as part of my doctoral degree showed that students, if you've done work integrated learning, you are twice as likely to be employed than a student who did not do work integrated learning. So yes, I think all the programs are aimed at, equipping students for the world of work. My view is just that WIL gives students the edge and the foot in the door.
Right. So Professor Brink mentioned the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, not just on, higher education institutions, but generally how we work and how we learn. And I know, Dr. Henry, you played a major role in shaping university guidelines for WIL in the context of the pandemic. Can you give us a sense how the pandemic has affected the implementation of WIL in higher education institutions? I imagine that both the financial challenges faced by employers and even universities hasn't made matters easier.
That's very true, Kanya. Look, the pandemic had affected programs in various or differing ways. For example, in the medical field, if you look at programs, say like clinical technology, this was really a once in a lifetime opportunity for students to be part of, the whole process in treating the pandemic, to be exposed to that. So I don't think in the near future, until the pandemic dissipates, that students will have an opportunity like that. So in that regard, those students weren't as adversely affected, and in some of the other programs as well. Where it did play a big role was, for instance, in the hospitality management and tourism management programs, where hotels and lodges had to close their doors. And then where do you go with the students? And that is where these guidelines that we've developed comes in, and also the modalities that Prof. Brink has referred to. So what we've done is we look at the outcomes, because remember, it's a curriculum matter. What are the outcomes that the students must achieve, and how can these outcomes be achieved differently at the same level of complexity at which it was curriculated without compromising on quality? And this has led to lots of innovative ideas, the one that Professor Brink has mentioned as well. Now, so in that regard, it has provided for innovative thoughts and just thinking differently, that there are more ways to skin a cat, so to speak. So it did have an effect, but it affected programs in differing ways, and we could make plans to mitigate the risks successfully.
Professor Brink, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to add from like Dr. Henry said, with the hospitality industry, what was very nice at the University of Johannesburg is that the industry came on board with new ideas on how to train these students. So they come on board with the university as mentors for these students. So they sit together with the lecturers and develop problem-based scenarios where the students then need to answer that. So it's like Dr. Henry said, it's time that we need to think out of the box. And that is one thing that we all learned from COVID. And that's one good thing from COVID, that we are no longer boxed, that WIL is just place a student for 6 months or place a student for a year and then come back to the university. It's now different modalities, and we can do reflection of learning, that where the students actually learn more than just placing students in the workplace.
What was very interesting also is that the pandemic itself provided ideas and opportunities. For example, in some of the programs, students have to write a marketing strategy as part of the outcome. And this provided the opportunity for employers to tap into, different and fresh ideas from students. Now,
Yes.
how are we going to market ourselves going forward as part of, an occurrence such as the COVID-19 pandemic?
Right. So I want to focus on students for a little bit, because I can recall that when I was a student, which was a lifetime ago, there was usually a degree of resistance or uncertainty when what we considered a foreign concept or idea was introduced to us. And I'm wondering, how do you incentivize students to participate meaningfully in WIL? The advantages are very clear, as you have both lined out. The benefits to WIL are very clear, but how do you incentivize them to participate in this? Do you go down the accreditation route, which appears to be common in American institutions? How do you get them to come on board with WIL?
I can go, Relene. What we do, like I've mentioned earlier, work-integrated learning is a curriculum matter. So there is really no choice for students if they are enrolled in a program that has got a compulsory work-integrated learning component. So they must do it. the ideal is for students to get the most out of this opportunity. And from the research that I've done at CUT, and I've asked all the employers in all the programs where we have a work integrated learning component, what are the skills and attributes that they want in students for them to be successful? And be it in engineering, management sciences, the humanities, health and environmental sciences, the one that came out on top is attitude. Now, obviously meaning a positive attitude. And the nice thing about an attitude, it is not something, that you need, or it's not rocket science. It is a conscious decision that anyone can take. I'm going to be positive in the face of adversity. And this is almost, sort of the feedback that we've been getting from employers is almost, even though subject matter expertise is important, that was rated second on the list that they had provided. They say they would rather hire for attitude and train for skill. So the attitude of students in being a success during work integrated learning is the key factor in my experience.
Yes, if I might add to that, Kanya, you see, attitude is the most important thing. But what I also teach my students and how I encourage my students, because in UJ it is not compulsory, but because we have hospitality from the old University of Technologies, that is a work integrated learning where we need to place the students. But for example, my students are doing project-based learning, where I will then get industry mentors for the students. So the thing that I normally tell my students is, you must remember that you're working with the industry for 10 months. In this 10 months, you can prove yourself that you are the best, and then that organization will then see that you are the best in this field, and you will have a job opportunity. And it is, for me, it is living proof, because since 2019 that I've started with the projects of the students, every year most of the students got employment or internship positions at the companies that they were working with for the projects. For example, this year the students work with Waymark on agriculture project, and Waymark took 2 of the students and give them internship for next year. So it's all attitude, and if the attitude is not right, then the stakeholder immediately complain, and then that is the snowball.
Right. How important is it for higher education institutions to foster meaningful and fruitful and stable relationships with industry? It seems critical to the success of WIL. And if I can even go in more detail, how would you advise, higher education institutions to go about fostering those relationships to improve the implementation of WIL?
Kanya, what I can say from my experience is that is an absolute, you hit the nail right on the head. You're absolutely right. It is an absolute key factor for the success of work integrated learning. What we must remember is that employers become our partners, and they must be treated as such. What my research has shown is that what employers want, I specifically asked them, what do they want from a university? And they said they want a relationship, a personal relationship built on trust and respect. So this means that it's almost like a relationship that I can, compare it with. It's not as if it's sort of, when you're married, you say you've told your wife once, I love you, and I will inform you if it changes. It's not that the thing. So it really working consistently and constantly on the relationship that we have with the employers. Because what in essence happens, the classroom moves from on campus to off campus, and they then become the lecturers, the people who supervise and mentor our students. So it's extremely important. And the better the relationship, what I found is then also the better the training, that the students receive. It's a more conducive environment for them. And then the students in the end benefit mostly from this as well.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Henry on that. And that's also for my module, what I'm teaching for project-based learning is I know work integrated learning, the industry stakeholders is evaluating the students. And for project-based learning, what I've done is the industry members are involved with the project from day one, with the assessing of the students, with advising of the students. So whenever the students is submitting, for example, a sprint review on the progress of the project, then the industry member will also give them feedback on and evaluate the students of what they are doing. Because I think if you don't get the industry to be involved in whatever modality you are using, then it's not going to be a success, because then they will feel that, so what is my role? So your roles and responsibility for the stakeholders must be very clear from day one. So that's why I think it's very necessary to have meetings, regular meetings with your stakeholders, with any type of modality or where you place your students. You need to have that roles and responsibilities. It must be clear what is expected from the industry. Because if you just get the industry and you place them and you leave the students, then so what? Then they can give the students anything to do instead of doing what is supposed to be done. So the relationship is critical. Without that relationship, it will not be successful.
All right, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. It just went silent on my end. But I'd like to, when you are talking about that relationship, obviously communication is key. There needs to be communication between industry stakeholders and higher education institutions. What happens when expectations change on either side? How do you negotiate that?
Okay. The way that I treat any relationship with industry is that I have bi-weekly meetings with my students. And with the COVID pandemic, is with the project-based learning, the industry was also part of the WhatsApp groups and with the groups. And I have meetings with each stakeholder as well, at least once a month or once every second month. But I think it's very important, and with any type of work integrated learning modality, it can change at any given time. But then you must be open from both sides and to see what the implication will be for all the role players. What will the implication be for the student if it changes? What will the implication be from an academic perspective if it changes? And then what it will be for the industry itself. Dr. Henry?
Yes, thank you, Relene. Change is constant. That is something I think that we've seen that happens consistently. In my view, it also creates opportunities. Remember, if we go back a bit earlier to when the discussion started, we mentioned that work integrated learning is a curriculum matter. So that when you do start to design a new program, there are the three partners, the student, the employer, and the university, and all of them must be on board from day one. So that they've got input in terms of the structure of the program, what are the modules to be included, and then in terms of work integrated learning, what are the outcomes that students will best achieve through work integrated learning. What is also important to note is that employers are in certain sense a consumer, of the products in inverted commas that the university produces, and that's then obviously the students. So they must tell us, and it's very important from especially University of Technology perspective, where it's very much vocationally directed, that employers must tell us what are the skills and attributes that the students must possess. We've had examples some years ago where employers told us of the engineering students, their hardcore engineering skills and knowledge, no problem with that. But they would like the students to know a little bit more about accounting as well. And then we could include accounting as part of the curriculum. So we need to stay in touch with what employers want. And then obviously, like what Professor Brink has mentioned as well, the role of the students, how will it affect the students? And that is why this tripartite relationship is so important. And the communication that you've mentioned, Kanya, that has to happen, and it has to happen regularly between the three of them.
Right. So when those communications do occur and there are changes that are suggested either to curricula or what have you, what are some of the obstacles towards implementing that? Because we already know that universities are pressed for budget. We already know that oftentimes there's some personnel shortages in some instances. How does that come into play then?
Well, I can speak from a University of Technology perspective. Some time ago, we went when the new HCQSF, the Higher Education Qualification Sub-Framework, was published. We went through a huge process of recurriculation of qualifications in the whole country. All the universities were affected, but more so the universities of technology. So in some cases, it was just a name change with not much happening. It was categorized into qualifications, category A, B, and C. So that was a whole process that we had to go through. But from a University of Technology perspective, once you've received accreditation for the offering of a qualification, you can make changes to a program up to 25% without having to obtain official permission for that. So it is a bit flexible, but if you want to really do major changes, the biggest obstacle would be all the hoops that you have to jump through and all the requirements that you have to meet for the program to be then re-accredited, if that is what it boils down to.
Yeah, and it's the same, Kanya, at the other universities as well. So it really depends on what is the type of change that industry would like to see. If it is more than what Dr. Jacob said, more than 25%, then it's a very long process, because there's certain steps. It must go to the department, then it must go to the faculty, then it goes to the Senate, and it must be approved on all levels, and then it will go to the final stages. But so it depends on what is the type of change that industry would like to see. If it's not a major change, then it is easy to adapt the curriculum. But if it's major changes, then there is certain processes that all academic or higher institutions need to follow.
Right. I'd like to move on to the WIL community of practice, or WILSA. Outside of your involvement in this particular community of practice, what other sort of experiences have you had with COPs?
From my side, I'm involved from 2019 with a community of practice for urban farming. And it is called the Isindaba Sukutla Community of Practice. And that community of practice is where I actually, one of my students or one of my groups helped them to develop a website for their community of practice, where the urban farmers will then go and find information on specific. They have a blog, they have courses that they do for the urban farmers. They have what they call Farmers Lab. So before COVID, it was face-to-face, but during COVID, we switched to virtual farmers lab. So where the farmers now will come together, and if they have questions or problems, then in that community of practice, that will be then discussed on that platform. So that I'm involved with that community of project of practice, and then I'm also involved with USAF, with Dr. Henry, as well as the experiential learning of community of practice. And I've started what I call a hashtag UJ, Work Integrated Education, Multidisciplinary Community of Practice for the university this year. And hopefully that will escalate next year.
Dr. Henry, outside of USAF, any experiences with the COP?
No, outside of USAF, not as much experience. Also with a little bit with the experiential learning community of practice. A community of practice is a wonderful thing because, you get people together who are passionate about the same thing. And the ideal platform, to bounce ideas off, to get different opinions, different ideas. Because it's really, in essence, people being brought together that's got the same goals and intentions in the specific subject matter field that's applicable for the community of practice.
Right. And obviously we've talked about some of the advantages to implementing a COP, but I'm wondering, what are some of the disadvantages that you perhaps foresee with implementing a COP?
Yeah, the disadvantages, it's really difficult to single out disadvantages because you work with people who join a community of practice that are committed and they want to see what they do work and taken to the next level. So the biggest stumbling block or disadvantage might be that, some people might not be willing to share their ideas as freely as what others would. And if there's a bit of a mission drift in terms of the community of practice from which it was originally intended for and established for. But in my view, if you've got the right people together, all passionate about what they want to do, you can overcome anything.
Right.
From my
Professor
side, yes, if I can add, I have a couple of I was actually thinking about disadvantages, and one disadvantage for me is it's very time consuming, because if you are very involved in that community of practice, specifically if you are the person in charge who administrate the community of practice, it can take up to 2 days, a week for you, because you must remember, a community of practice, you need to communicate with that people on a regular basis. And then also something else that I was thinking is that we call them the trolls, is those people, specifically if you do it on a virtual community of practice, and I saw it on the Isindaba Sekutla community of practice, is you will get those people that will come in on the block and make comments, negative comments. So they are really not, their heart and soul is not in that community of practice. But so that is also, and then something else that can also be negative is when you are part of a community of practice, then you get people sometimes just relying on the community of practice and not looking wider of really what's going outside of the community of practice, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think that brings me to another question, which isn't very easy to answer, but how do you overcome those mission drifts, as Dr. Henry put it? Because from what I understand, not everybody comes with the same mission in mind. And in addition to that, you may have people who don't contribute ideas as freely, not because they don't have any or they don't want to, but because maybe they're shy. How do you overcome some of those challenges when you are trying to bring together a community of practice?
Well, Kanya, you must get a very handsome and adorable chairperson. You know, that
Yeah, Dr.
That
Jacob,
could help. That could help.
that will help definitely with me. Yeah, I think that what you can do is that if normally what I do in a community of practice, if I see that there's one or two people that is not that passionate, then I will go the extra mile and make an appointment with them and have a conversation and really try and nitpick their brains to find out what is it, why are they within the community of practice. Because I think if you understand that person better, then it will be easier for you to draw the person within the discussion. I don't know, Dr. Henry, other than getting a handsome guy there as a person.
I agree with what you've said, Relin. It's a lot of diplomacy also involved in that. And I think, sometimes people might just be shy, and that their contribution might be regarded as inferior. And I mean, it's very normal to human nature. All of us want to feel a little bit important and that we are valued. And I think if we can get that message across to every member of the community in practice, that they are indeed, respected and valued for their opinion, then that goes a long way sort of in mitigating that risk.
Right. And I mean, the opposite of that, I presume that there may be communities of practice where people overestimate the importance of their ideas and it becomes somewhat of an elitist boys' club. Again, we've spoken about diplomacy, but how do you overcome that where a space becomes quite toxic and elitist and it's not necessarily about the quality of ideas, but people actually just getting to say their piece?
Yeah, I think for that, Kanya, it's very important if you start a community of practice that your aims and objectives is clear. Because the minute that you get somebody like that or deviate from your aims and objectives, then it's easy to get the people back to say, let's focus on the aims and the objectives. The aims of this community of practice is X, Y, and Z.
Right.
That's just so the aims, the objectives, and your what you want to get from a community of practice, that is very important, and that must be very clear from the word go. If I just think back, Henry, to the USAF, the USAF community of practice for work integrated learning. What do we call it? Learning in practice, community of practice. If I just think of that, the very first meeting that we have with Henry on that community of practice was to get the ground rules laid down. What is the aims? What is the objectives? And to with work integrated learning, we always have a debate on what is the right terminologies for work integrated learning. Why is it not experiential learning? And then you get consensus as a group. And if you have a consensus as a community of practice and a group, and your aims and objectives is clear, then I think it's easy to just get that person right on track again and say, let's focus. This is the aims and objectives of the community of practice. Dr. Henry?
Now, I think important, is to still realize that you're working with human beings and human beings have feelings and emotions. Is that I agree wholeheartedly with what Professor Brink has said. If you've laid the foundation correctly, you kind of prevent a lot of these issues from happening. But if it does happen, it's not, I prefer not, to get into an argument with someone say in a meeting, for example, or
Yeah.
you see things where people get upset and they start to copy the rest of the world into their emails. I mean, my view is, sort it out with the person, on an individual level,
On a one-on-one.
yeah, what are the issues, sort it out, and then from there you can go ahead. Something else that I can maybe add, Kanya, in all my experience in working with work integrated learning, you will find people involved with work integrated learning can do a lot of talking, and they are all very passionate about what they do. Attend one of these meetings, it's really just to, people, they are so excited and passionate about what they do. It's, just to get them steered in the right direction the whole time. But it's absolutely fantastic, that people can be so passionate about something. And I mean, that's really based on the value that we see and how it benefits our students, and their careers. So just a side comment.
No, thank you for that. And I'm pretty sure that we'll have a cute and handsome chair to steer that enthusiasm in the right direction. But my last question for you both, do you see your involvement in this particular COP aiding teaching and learning around WIL at your respective institutions?
Oh yes, definitely. I need to say that from my side, I think it's more difficult for myself than for Henry. Is that you must remember we are a comprehensive university and a 4IR university as well. So I definitely I've started the hashtag UJ Work Integrated Education Multidisciplinary Project. And that I seen as a beginning of a community of practice. And do I have time just to give you just an idea of what it is, Kanya?
Of course, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, because sometimes you need to just stop me. So what this multidisciplinary project is I've developed a work integrated education platform for the university. Now this platform will form at the end of next year a community of practice for all work integrated learning, work integrated education stakeholders. So that is your students, your alumni students, your industry stakeholders, your industry partners, your career fairs, your staff members. So that's a platform where all these members can go to, and then the industry can place the internship positions, or the students can place their CVs, or where they can just have a conversation on skills development. So we're also looking at the skills hub to show the skills visibility of the students. So that is just a multidisciplinary. The multidisciplinary project was between the first phase of this project was between law students and strategic communication students and AIS students. So the law students advise the AIS students on what they can do for this platform according to the POPIA Act, and the strategic communication advise the AIS students on how they can tell their stories better from a strategic communication perspective. And then the AIS students then vice versa help the law students and the strategic communication students on how they can do better. So for UJ, there is definitely coming up a community of practice. By end of next year, it will be fully functioned.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Dr. Henry?
Thank you very much, Kanya. You've now seen in practice what I mean about people when they're passionate about work integrated learning. Amazing,
Sorry, you can say that, Henry. I talk too much. Sorry.
No. So, it's wonderful to see the passion in people, and the commitment to what they do. For me, how a community of practice can aid teaching and learning at my own institution, I'm a big believer that there's great value in diversity. It's to get rid of this sort of the silo effect. Sort of when our University of Technology, these are our pockets of excellence, and we're going to stick with that and ignore the rest. Or whereas a traditional university is more research-based, if we just break down the silos, and open up. And that's what I found of great value of a community of practice, is because you're exposed to different university types. There are members that come from the CETAs, from DHET, there's employee organizations involved. So we get all these different perspectives on what people are doing. And the idea might not be sort of tailor-made that you can apply it at your own institution, but it does give you an idea. Like some might have a very good idea in terms of project-based learning, what Professor Brink has explained, what they do at UJ. Others will have a good idea in terms of simulations, how they go about simulations. And so, see, the more you share knowledge, the more valuable it becomes. Because if you keep it to yourself, it doesn't benefit anyone really. So to me, that is where the great value lies, in that you get exposed to many different things. And from there, what you share and what others share, everyone has an opportunity to take what will fit their institution the best and apply it accordingly.
Yeah, I agree with you. But Dr. Henry, like I said, the multidisciplinary project that we've done this year between strategic communication and law and AIS, it was draining, but it was wonderful to see, because now we have basically a fourth party. Because remember, we have the triad partnership of industry and students and the university. With the multidisciplinary between different faculties, you now have students learning from other students from other disciplines. And I think that was just, for me, taking it to another level. So I think, we need to start learning, not only just within the universities, but I mean, I can learn a lot from Henry, what he is doing in his university. And I think that is why it is important for South Africa to have a community of practice like USAP, where we can share this type of knowledge with one another and stop living in silos.
Right. I think that's an excellent note to end on. Professor Brink, Dr. Henry, thank you so much for your time today. I trust that we'll be hearing from you very soon. And thank you so much for giving us your time on the HERESA podcast.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Kanya. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kanya, and thank you for the invite. It is a pleasure, and enjoy your day. Thanks,
You
Dr.
too.
Henry.
Thanks, colleagues.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.